one of the things that we've been trying to do over the last, couple of years is get working on having in-services. And that seems like it would be a simple thing to do, but as you can imagine, when everybody is out and about at homes, it's hard to find a way to get everyone to come. But once we got the building here, we figured it would be a little easier to have a good gathering spot. And we're going to videotape today, so those who are not able to do it will be able to come. And truthfully, the topic today, the Alzheimer's and Dementia, really came from the survey that those of you who filled out, that we asked you to fill out online. The Survey Monkey really came from that. That's where we're getting the topics. We knew of topics that we thought were important, but we wanted to know what was important to the MCC team. So this was by far the highest rated request in the survey. So as we started planning, who better to go to but Ginny Nyhuis, who works for the Alzheimer's Association and does all their, a lot of their training locally here. And for those of you who don't know, Ginny actually worked at Embrace. She and I were the first two, when we started Embrace, Ginny and I were it. And actually Ginny worked before we had the MCCs. So, and then Ginny, how long now has it been? Probably about 3 years since you left, maybe? Almost 3 years? 2.5, okay. So Ginny's very aware of Embrace and what we do, and so as we were thinking of someone who could speak on this topic, this is what she does now full time. But again, having that connection with Embrace, we thought it'd be nice to bring her here to talk. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to her.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I have to say that I was surprised when I asked Mary when she invited me to come speak, and I asked her how many employees do you have, so I could make sure I have enough materials, and she told me 65. And I remember way back when it was 2.
Yeah.
Me and her, and that was it. So, but I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you. You will see that I like to keep my presentations a little bit informal, so please feel free to participate, to ask questions. I might say we're going to get to that, hold off on that, but if you have something that you want to ask, feel free to do that, because I do want to make sure that you are getting out of this what you need and what you expected to get out of this. So the title of this presentation is Behavior and Communication, and this is a presentation that I do quite often, especially for professional staff, because it can be done as an in-service, but it's very informative, and it really helps you work through some of the issues you might actually be dealing with when you are in people's homes. So what I want to ask, if you have certain situations you have dealt with, or maybe are trying to figure out how to deal with when you're caring for somebody with dementia, at the end of today, I hopefully will allow a little bit of time so we can kind of brainstorm some of those situations. And I will tell you that I can give you tips and techniques and ideas, but it's not always going to work, unfortunately. When we're talking about somebody with dementia, they're very individual. Every case is different. So something that works one day might not work another day. Something that doesn't work one day might work another day. So don't be afraid to be creative and think outside of the box. I do have to caution you before I start, and this is kind of what I was saying, is that because everybody with Alzheimer's disease is different, it's not a guarantee that these tips and techniques will work. But we do have, or we have collected this information that we'll have in this presentation from other professionals as well as family caregivers. So a couple of things I want to do today is, first of all, make sure that you understand the effect that Alzheimer's disease has on the brain. How many of you have ever taken a class on Alzheimer's? Okay, a few of you, that's good. Good to know. How many of you have maybe attended a presentation, either by myself or somebody else on Alzheimer's? Okay, a few of you. So I'd like to ask that so I kind of know how in-depth I need to get into the first part on how it's affecting the brain. Looks like everybody's had some experience with that, so I'll skim over that pretty quickly unless there's specific questions as we go on. And then what I also want to do is help you learn some important communication keys, and then how to pull it all together and how that communication especially affects a person's behavior when we're talking about somebody with Alzheimer's disease. dementia in itself is not a diagnosis, it's a condition, it's a set of symptoms. And it does affect things like thinking and language and behavior and perception and all of those things. Alzheimer's disease is the most prevalent type of dementia. So dementia is that big category word, Alzheimer's disease, one disease that causes those set of symptoms. And I have some handouts here, so let me pass them on. Yeah. To you. And I probably should have mentioned before I started, but I forgot. One of the things I gave you as handouts is a copy of all these slides. So you'll be able to take some notes, you'll have it for future reference. And got plenty of extras here, so I'll make sure Mary gets those to have for the rest of the staff. Believe it or not, a lot of people do not realize that Alzheimer's disease is not a typical part of aging. In fact, there was a survey that was just done, and worldwide, about 60% of people believe that Alzheimer's disease that comes with aging. We're all going to get it if we live long enough. That's not true. And another 40% did not understand that Alzheimer's disease is fatal. People die with Alzheimer's disease. No, yes?
Not everyone gets Alzheimer's, but does everyone get dementia?
No. No, dementia is a condition. So it's just like saying, does everybody get cancer? Or does everybody get heart disease, or whatever it might be? No, not everybody does get dementia either. That's the overall condition. But good question, thanks. So Dr. Alzheimer's in 1906 first had a patient that he followed, and when she died, he did an autopsy of her brain and looked at it under the microscope, and he saw what he called plaques and tangles. So back in 1906 was the first time that Alzheimer's disease was actually described. And Dr. Alzheimer's, that's how we got its name. We didn't just try to come up with a name that makes everybody figure out what it is. It was named after the doctor that first described it. So that's over 100 years ago. We still know that the plaques and tangles are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. We also know what plaques and tangles are caused by, but what we're still trying to figure out is why are those plaques and tangles caused in the person's brain. And believe it or not, all of you, me, everybody, has some plaques and tangles in your brain. People with Alzheimer's disease, though, tend to have more. And we know that the plaques are one type of protein that is built up in the brain. It's called beta amyloid. And the tangles are a second type of protein built up in the brain. It's called tau. And just recently, last month in fact, we had our Alzheimer's Association International Conference, which is a conference where researchers from around the world get together. And there were about 1,000 researchers that gathered in Copenhagen this year. And one of the things that was presented is that there is actually a third protein that is building up in the brain, and it is probably more of an indicator of who's going to get Alzheimer's disease and who won't get it. And they also have found that that same protein builds up in the eye. So they are now looking at possibly eye tests that are able to identify if a person is going to get Alzheimer's disease or not. So that's a huge breakthrough. There are some other different tests. They're also using blood tests, things like that, to try to determine who will get the disease, who will not. The next step now, we've got to figure out what we can give to people that we identify that might get the disease. What can we do to keep the symptoms from ever happening? So Alzheimer's disease, it is fatal. People do die from it. In fact, it is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States right now. When we talk about dementia, there's over 70 different diseases that cause the symptoms of dementia or cause that condition of dementia. Obviously, most of them are very rare because Alzheimer's disease does count for about 60 to 80%, depends upon who you talk to. But all the rest, all those 69 others, are making up that other percent. And believe it or not, they are becoming more prevalent because of a few things, mostly because better diagnosis and being able to determine different types. But has anybody in the group ever heard of vascular dementia? Okay, I see a couple heads nodding. Vascular dementia is caused by stroke or heart disease. It's because that blood from the heart is being prohibited to travel up to the brain for some reason. And most commonly it's because that person has had a stroke. And it might be what we call TIAs, which are very small strokes. The person may not even realize that they've had them. Vascular dementia is different than Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease has a very slow onset, slow progression. Vascular dementia, it's more of, kind of describe it as steps, where a person will have a stroke and you'll see a real decline in their cognitive abilities. Then they might be okay and be leveled off for quite a while, and then they might have another stroke and then have another dip or decrease in their cognitive abilities. So it's much different than Alzheimer's disease because of the way of the onset of it. Anybody ever heard of Lewy body dementia or Lewy body disease? Okay, another one, and depending upon who you talk to, some people say Lewy body disease is the second most prevalent. Some people say vascular dementia. Some people say frontal temporal dementia. Depends upon who you talk to. But regardless, Lewy body is another disease that we're seeing more prevalence and better diagnosis of. And that one is really, it doesn't affect the memory right away, but it affects the ability for that person to move, so their motor abilities. And they struggle with walking, and they have unsteady gait, and they may have some tremors, and they'll definitely have some incontinence, something that we don't see in Alzheimer's disease until later in the disease process. Lewy body, you see that is one of the first symptoms. Does that sound like something else you may have ever heard of? Parkinson's, yes. In fact, Parkinson's disease falls under that category of Lewy body disease. So there's the big kind of umbrella, dementia, then there are smaller ones underneath it, and then there's diseases under that too. So Parkinson's, and it's really Parkinson's with dementia that we see falls under Lewy body disease. Anybody ever heard of frontal temporal dementia? Or maybe primary progressive aphasia or Pick's disease. All those two are two types. There's actually about 7 different types of frontal temporal disease. Frontal temporal dementia, it affects the front of the brain or the side of the brains. The front of the brain, executive thinking, being able to recognize feelings in other people, being able to follow directions. The side of the brain is language. Language and the ability to get words out. Those things are affected in frontal temporal. Again, before we see issues with memory loss, where with Alzheimer's disease, it's the memory loss that we see first. So those 3, besides Alzheimer's disease, are the ones that people seem to hear a little bit more about. The frontal temporal, the Lewy body, and the vascular dementia. And then there's a whole category of people that have what we call mixed dementia, meaning they have 2 or more kinds. And about 50% of everybody with Alzheimer's disease has what we call mixed dementia, where they really have Alzheimer's disease, but something else. And a few more statistics about Alzheimer's disease. African Americans, Hispanics are at a much higher risk than Caucasians to develop the disease. African American, it's about 2 to 3 times as much, and Hispanics are almost 7 times higher their risk is. Again, if you know a whole lot about those populations, they also tend to have and be higher risk for heart disease, which you'll probably notice as we go through this presentation, there's a lot of correlation between that heart and the brain. Taking care of your heart, you're taking care of your brain. But there's other reasons also why they tend to be at a higher risk. I mentioned before, Alzheimer's disease, 6th leading cause of death in the United States right now, and that's also, though it's not quite that high, that's pretty much across the world. It is very high leading cause of death across the world. And the total number of deaths attributed to Alzheimer's disease continues to increase. And it's the only disease out there that there has been over the last decade a dramatic increase in the number of deaths. Cancer, there's been a decrease. Heart disease, been a decrease. Even AIDS, HIV, there's been a decrease in the number of deaths, while Alzheimer's disease continues to rise. So, I know Mary did a pitch for it earlier, but the Walk to End Alzheimer's is one way that we raise funds for research. Alzheimer's Association is the largest private funder of research, and we do give out research grants. We do that at our national level. But I know that Embrace already has their team registered, correct, Mary?
Yeah.
I thought so. I thought I saw you listed. So get out there and walk. Help us raise some funds as well as awareness. Okay, how many of you ever seen a picture of the brain before? Okay, a couple of you. Well, this picture is a healthy brain, and this would be an autopsy picture. So basically what happens at the time of death when they're doing an autopsy of the brain is they take your brain out and they slice it, kind of like a loaf of bread. And they look at those slices under the microscope. So this would be a healthy brain. Who knows how much a brain weighs? I have to bring chocolate today. Not 5, that's a little high, but you're close. Any other guesses? You're getting closer. Process of elimination. Yes, it's 3 pounds. 3 pounds is a healthy brain. Kind of almost looks like a head of cauliflower, right? With all the crooks and crannies and crevices. However, it has a consistency of scrambled eggs, so it's not that hard like a head of cauliflower. And on this picture, if I could point them out, they're actually kind of hard to see, but there's 2 little pieces right there and right there. That's called the hippocampus. There's one on each side of your brain. And why I point those out is because when we talk about Alzheimer's disease, that's the first part of the brain that gets affected. Any guesses what the hippocampus does? Think back to, I think, like 3rd or 4th grade elementary school science. What was that? Well, actually the hippocampus, it stores short-term memory. And then it also processes. So it stores, puts it into long-term memory, and then pulls it back up. So when we talk about Alzheimer's disease affecting the hippocampus, then it makes sense that the first issue you're going to see is that short-term memory loss. That person that's going to ask the same question over and over, even though you just answered it, because they cannot learn something new. And anytime you're answering a question that they just asked, you're trying to get them to learn new information. They can't do it. So they're going to repeat those questions over and over and over. This brain, this healthy brain, is actually made up of 100 billion, 100 billion nerve cells, or what we call neurons. And they're connected in over 100 trillion places by little branches. It almost, if you look at it under the microscope, the brain actually almost looks like a little forest, where you see the cells or the neurons, and then there's all branches coming off of them connecting to other neurons. And what's happening for a person that has Alzheimer's disease, this is a picture of somebody that died with Alzheimer's disease. You notice some differences? What do you see?
Shrinkage.
Shrinkage, yeah. What else? Yeah, holes, gaps. These little things here are the hippocampus. You can actually see them better on this picture. But on the first picture, they almost look like a lima bean. They've now shrunk down to kind of more like a pea. The brain actually loses about a third to a half of its mass because of Alzheimer's disease. So it shrinks from that 3-pound healthy brain to about 2 pounds, maybe even 1.5 pounds. And what's happening is those plaques and tangles are killing those neurons and killing or preventing those branches from carrying signals from one neuron to another. So because of that, those neurons die. If they can't talk to each other, they die, because that's what the brain's function is. It's to talk to other neurons in the brain and eventually to the rest of the body to make the whole body function. But when they can't talk to each other, they die. And that's what's happened for somebody with Alzheimer's disease. And then they're eliminated, which is what's causing those big holes. And those holes actually fill up with fluid, or water, basically. So that brain has really shrunk. However, I do want you to notice one other thing about the brain. There are still parts left, right? And as long as there's parts of that brain left, that means that person has some abilities. And as caregivers and as professionals, it's really our job to figure out what those abilities are and to cherish those and help them to use those. So a lot of times, those abilities may really seem very hidden or very slight or not much there, but there is something still there. And let me tell you an interesting thing about the brain. The hippocampus I mentioned, right behind the hippocampus is another little piece of the brain. It's called the amygdala. Has everybody ever heard of the amygdala? Okay. That stores feelings and emotions and helps us to recognize feelings and emotion. A person with Alzheimer's disease, even though that hippocampus is destroyed, their amygdala is not destroyed. So we know that throughout the whole disease process, they still can recognize feelings and emotions. They're just not able to communicate that to us, or they may not understand why they have those feelings and emotion. So for an example, how many of you have maybe had that person that has some type of dementia and they can't remember your name? And even though you come and care for them every single day you have to tell them your name again. And believe me, for somebody that's really progressed in the disease process, every time you leave the room and come back, you have to tell them your name again, because to them you're a stranger. Okay? Have anybody experienced that where families are coming to you and saying, you know, they can't remember my name. I'm their daughter, or I'm their son, or I'm their spouse, and they can't remember my name. And my response to that is, they may not remember your name, but they remember that feeling of love. And they know that you are somebody that loves them, because first of all, you're here every day, and secondly, you're doing things for them. You're helping to take care of them and helping them to be able to still use their abilities as best as possible. So they may not recognize your name, but they recognize that feeling of love, safety, security, all those feelings. And they're also not able to express those verbally, communicate them to us. Did you have a question? Okay. All right, so some of the areas that are affected with the brain, and we're going to break these down and talk about each one of these and how you can maybe have a little bit better understanding of them to be able to provide better care for somebody with dementia. So the parts of the brain that are affected: memory, language, perception and recognition, purposeful movement, and complex thought. So let's talk about memory first. And again, I mentioned before, with some of the other dementias, memory is not affected until a little bit later in the disease process. Alzheimer's disease, memory is the first thing that's affected. It's good to know that, because if you are dealing with somebody with you're told this person does have dementia, they have primary progressive aphasia. Okay, that should tell you, okay, they're going to be able to remember what I'm telling them, but primary progressive aphasia means language is affected. They're not going to be able to communicate to the point where pretty quickly within a disease progression, they will not be able to verbally communicate at all. But at first it might be just some words that they can't get out. But it gets tough for families because they're thinking this person has dementia, that means they can't remember things, and that's why they're not talking to me. But really, they can remember things. And in fact, I'm working with a gentleman right now who has primary progressive aphasia, and he tells me, not only can I remember the word, I can actually see the word. It's like written right there in front of my face. I just can't tell you what it is. So it's a real struggle for him because he can't get those words out, but he knows he can't get them out. So that's difficult. So, but with Alzheimer's disease, memory is first affected. The other diseases, memory will be affected later. And that includes things like not remembering the people or events. Now, how many of you have ever struggled with getting that person's name out? Now, who was that actor, you know, that one that he was in all those movies? I heard that he just passed away. I can't remember who that is. Okay, what happens when that type of thing happens to you?
Be frustrated.
You get frustrated, right, right. And eventually what happens? You remember. And if you're like me, that usually happens in the middle of the night, right? And believe it or not, there's a good reason why that happens in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night, especially when we get into our deep sleep, that's when our brain is doing its work and turning memories from short-term to long-term and reprocessing things. And that's why, and not only that, then our brain's also very relaxed. And so that's when those memories come to us. Because we're not getting frustrated and putting more stress on ourselves to remember that. So eventually it comes to us. Remembering events. Again, how many of you have maybe, forgot what day it was, or maybe you're sitting around with the family and talking about a childhood vacation and, well, that's not the way I remember that. No, that's not what happened on that vacation. That was a different time that that happened. Any of you have ever experienced that? Okay, yeah, so we struggle with that, and everybody does, and that's part of aging. For a person with Alzheimer's, it's a little different. Because typically, if those memories aren't there now, they're never going to be there again. Typically. Again, not always. And then the other part is, it's not going to come to them in the middle of the night. Because their brain basically is broken. They have a disease of the brain that's going to allow that to not happen. They're not able to learn something new. I mentioned this before. It doesn't matter how many times you tell it to them, they're not going to learn it. They're not going to learn it, and they're not going to remember it. You can't do that. The part of the brain that does that, the hippocampus, is being affected. So you can tell it to them till the cows come home, and they aren't going to remember it. Okay? We also see repetition, and not just with asking the same questions over and over, although that is part of the repetition, but especially as the disease progresses, there's a lot of repeating the same words over and over, or sometimes repeating what we call gibberish, where it really doesn't make any sense, but they're repeating it over and over. Sometimes it might be just, especially when they get stressed or in confusing situations or a lot of people around, it might be just like yelling, an outburst. Again, not making any sense, but just repeating the same things over and over. And then there's the whole misplacing things. And for the person with dementia, it's not about losing things. It's about putting them in unusual places and then forgetting where they put them. So things like the purse in the freezer, or the keys in the sugar bowl, or the wallet in the wastebasket. Or I have one gentleman, I actually used to work with him when I worked at Grace. And he used to, every night when he would go to bed, he would take his hearing aids out I misplaced them. It was somebody stole them. And he lived in a facility, so it was the people that worked there. They would come in at night and steal his hearing aids. Has anybody ever experienced that with a person with dementia? Now what I did was I turned that around from an upsetting, frustrating, bad situation into a good situation because I learned where he put his hearing aids. So I would come in, oh, you don't have your hearing aids in. Nope, somebody stole them. They came in last night while I was sleeping and took them again. And I would go to his refrigerator, pull up the glass, here are your hearing aids. And guess what? I became the hero because I found his hearing aids that somebody else stole. So using those types of situations to your advantage or to make it a better situation for that person really is helpful. If you can figure out where some of those hiding places are, and believe me, sometimes you can't. You know, but like I said, a big one is check the wastebasket. They're missing something. A lot of things go into the garbage when they're missing something. And if you can learn where some of those hiding places are and turn that into a better situation rather than you stole that from me.
When they do that, do they have a real purpose in their mind at that moment? Or is it?
When they misplace things? Yeah, it's hard to tell. Maybe. Sometimes it kind of, logically thinking, that kind of makes sense. And sometimes, it's just kind of random. So it's really kind of hard to tell. But yeah, what I always recommend to, whether it be professional caregivers or even family caregivers, to whenever that person's getting upset or frustrated or stressed over something, to take that step back and kind of analyze the whole situation. What may have been going on before this? What may have happened? For us, when we lose our keys, what do? Yeah, you retrace your steps. Where did I last have them? Where could I have left them? When I came running in the house, was the phone ringing? And I just threw them on the table, or did I have to really go to the bathroom fast? And I left them on the bathroom counter, or where might they be? The person with dementia can't do that, so you kind of need to do that for them. Is figure out where might they have been, where might they have last had it, where might they have put it. This is the Alzheimer's timeline. And if you think of not only a person with Alzheimer's, but even your life as being on a timeline. We all start at this point here, right? And we're all eventually going to get here. And a person with Alzheimer's, they're moving along that timeline, and they get to a certain point on it, and then they pretty much stop, and all of a sudden start moving backwards on that timeline. So they might be 80 years old, and now all of a sudden, they're moved back in their timeline, and they're thinking they're 60 years old, or maybe even 40 years old, or maybe even 20 years old. So what we need to do is figure out where might they be on that timeline at any given time that we're with them, and follow along with the stories that they're sharing about that time period. And it's not real nice, neat cut drive where they get to 80 and all of a sudden it's 70 and then 60. They kind of float around on that timeline. Don't know why, but that's just one of the things that happens with the disease. So one day they may be thinking they're 40, the next day they may be thinking they're 60, the next day they may be thinking they're 20. But they move to different places on the timeline. So knowing that, how do you think you would be able to figure out where that person is on their timeline? Yes?
I always ask them, like, when I'm talking to them, like, oh, I forgot your birthday. Well, and you ask them, like, oh, I'm 42 today. And you kind of, then you know what you ask me, and not, voting for them, what you're saying. And you say, oh, okay, 70. They'll argue that, and you say, oh, no, I'm not. What are you talking about? I always ask them how old they are on their birthday,
Yep. That's an excellent way that most people don't think of. But yeah,
refer to or talk about interests as well?
Yes. What are they talking about? What are the stories they're sharing with you? You know, if they're talking about, I gotta get out of here, I gotta go pick up the kids from school, okay? They're probably not thinking they're 80 years old, right? They're probably thinking that what?
They're 30, 40 years old.
Right. Back when they had young children that were in school. And getting them home from school becomes very important. So, yes.
Why is it important to know who they are on that time? Is it because you relate to them then at that time?
Yep. Yeah, because what do you think was going to happen in her situation where she asked the person, how old are you? And they say, oh, I'm 50 years old. And you know they're 70 years old. And you say, no, you're not, you're 70. What do you think's going to happen?
Well, they're gonna be, they won't like what you're saying and they'll deny it or be angry.
Yep. Yep.
And then you won't be able to converse with them or communicate with them because
Right.
there's an initial issue of communication that's being blocked.
Right.
They don't like you, they're frustrated.
Yep.
They want to argue with you.
Yep. You bet. You hit everything. They're going to argue with you. They're going to become frustrated. They're not going to trust you any longer because you're telling them something that's not true. You're insisting on something that's not true. A person with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias cannot think logically. So it doesn't pay to argue with them. We need to be able to rationally, logically think in order to be able to argue. You're never going to win with a person with dementia. If they're telling you it's like this, it's like that. If they're telling you that grass outside is purple, that grass outside is purple. And they actually may be perceiving it that way. So whatever they're telling you, you've got to go along with those stories. You can't be contradicting them. You can't be arguing with them. So what about that lady that says, I got to get going. I got to get to the Elvis concert tonight. What's going to be your response? How are you going to handle that?
Tom has been canceled, he's sick, and he's rescheduled for next week.
Okay, you could tell him that he's sick, it's been canceled. I would caution you with that one, because that may arouse some other feelings of, what do you mean he's sick? I gotta go see him, I'm his biggest fan, take me to wherever he is. So be careful with that one, but it might work.
Talk about why you like Elvis and his songs and stuff and get into the topic
Excellent.
of Elvis and see what they know.
Yeah, excellent. What we talk about doing is, first of all, validating the feeling. Okay? This lady thinks she's going to go to the Elvis concert. That's got to be really exciting for her. So, wow, are you lucky? How exciting. And then, like you said, is try to redirect the conversation and eventually redirect them to even possibly another activity. And the way you do that is, tell me, what's your favorite song? What's your favorite movie with Elvis in it? You know what? I think we have some Elvis records here. Let's go listen to some Elvis songs. So try to redirect them, get their mind off of, gotta get out of here, gotta get to the Elvis concert. Another thing might be, how exciting for you? What are you gonna wear? And then redirect the conversation that way. Oh, I was planning on wearing my red dress. Oh, why don't you wear that black dress? That looks so good on you. I remember the first time I saw you in that black dress. And kind of, again, redirect the conversation that way. Language is effective. They use the wrong words. Okay? They may be saying, give me that orange, I need a drink of water. When they're using the wrong words, how do you figure out what they're trying to tell you? Okay, show me what you're talking about. I'm being stupid today, I can't figure it out. Show me. No. Or even maybe figuring out by the context they were talking about. They also tend to use what we call workaround words. So they use things like, tell me what time it is on that clock on your hand. bathroom, needed to use the toilet. So workaround words they will often be using. Again, you need to kind of be a detective. How are they using it? What are they gesturing to? You know, what are their facial expressions when they're trying to use the words? Figure it out what they're trying to mean, what they're trying to apply. The ability to understand words, they lose that ability. Person in early stages of dementia will be able to understand or will miss about 3 out of 10 words. As it progresses into what we consider the more middle stages, that progresses to or decreases to 7 out of 10, or increases to 7 out of 10 words that they are actually missing. So think about that. If somebody is telling you something and you're missing 7 out of 10 words, what's the likelihood you're going to understand what they're telling you?
Is the evidence then that they're unable to say or identify those words, but they can understand all of your words?
No, and that's the other part is they can't understand your words either. They can't get words out themselves, and then they begin to lose that understanding what the meaning of words are in both reading and talking. So when that happens, when a person's struggling verbally to communicate with you, how are you going to communicate with them?
Offer suggestions, certain words, or let me rephrase this, so I have this is how I understand it.
Okay?
Really using this.
When you're rephrasing what they're telling you?
Right,
Okay?
yeah.
Yep, and that might work. How else might you be able to communicate with that person? Pictures? Yes, that actually is very helpful with a person with dementia. That's extremely helpful for a person with frontal temporal dementia, the person that really struggles with following steps and directions, or if you're showing pictures, especially pictures of each step, they're able to actually carry out the activity. But yeah, same thing with other types of dementias. Pictures.
Sometimes, could it be that you just don't expect them to express in words, but anticipates what they might need? So,
Could
like,
be.
you know, he always has a cup of coffee when he eats. So don't wait for him to ask for it. Just put it there because you'll eventually, be looking for it. Maybe.
That's excellent. Anticipating their needs from their previous routine. So if you know that, like you said, always have a cup of coffee with their breakfast or with whatever meal it might be, rather than waiting for them to ask for a cup of coffee and they're frustrated because they don't have their cup of coffee and they can't get out coffee. Anticipate and give it to them ahead of time. So, yes.
Well, I guess it's a mention to a words, a person who reads incessantly. You think they're reading. Could they be just like going through motions? In other words, they see these things come across their eyes and their brain, and, you ask them, what did you just read?
Probably.
I can't imagine how that person, it gets to be kind of routine or something like that. I mean, it's a great thing because it occupies the time. But, that you can say, okay, read this, we can't presume that they understand.
Absolutely, you're right.
So,
And a lot of times what they might be doing is just reading the same words over and over and over, trying to remember and comprehend it. So, somebody that's always enjoyed reading the paper,
yes.
and you bring them the paper every morning, they may still enjoy looking at it and reading the same thing over and over, but it may also be a source of frustration for them. Or all of a sudden, why are you getting this? I can't read it, I can't understand it anymore, and it becomes frustrating for them. So a lot of times when you're dealing with somebody with dementia, it's really just going with your gut. What's working, what's not, what's decreasing their stress, what's increasing their stress or their anxiety, and trying things again. Something might work one day, not another day. Might not work one day, it might work another day. The other thing about person is really watching the nonverbals. Because believe it or not, for a person with dementia, that's what they're doing with you, is they're watching your nonverbals. They're watching how you're saying something. They're watching what your facial expressions are. They're watching what you might be gesturing to or pointing to. So they're constantly watching us to try to figure out what we're telling them. Perception and recognition changes. For a person with dementia, being able to recognize what's real and what's not is lost. So for them, if they're seeing it, if it's happening in their world right now, it's happening right now. Okay, so think about that person that maybe sits and watches TV all day long. Okay, and a lot of times people with dementia will sit and watch TV all day long because nobody else gets them started into something else, and they've lost that ability to initiate. So, and I hear this all the time especially from facilities. Well, they love to sit all day and watch TV. No, they really don't. They're doing it because they can't get up and get started and do something else, or they can't tell you, what, I don't like this. So you think they're enjoying it. But realize the TV, not the best thing for somebody with dementia. Think of the TV shows you like. How many of you are CSI fans or NCIS? Well, what was that?
So they could be scary.
They can be very scary. Because for them, that's really happening. I have a gentleman that we worked with who lived in Brookfield. And remember, it's almost 2 years ago now, a year and a half, where they had the shooting at the spa in Brookfield. And he used to be a cop for the city of Brookfield. And he was watching the news because he always watched the news every day. That's what his family had him do, because he always enjoyed watching the news. And he saw that, and he was like, I've got to go. There's something going on, it's on my beat, I gotta go. And his family was like, what are you talking about? You're retired, you're not a cop any longer. He's like, I am a police officer, I need to be there. Don't be telling me I'm retired, I'm too young to be retired. I just was at the job yesterday. And then his family's like, Dad, it's okay, you're off today. Your buddies are handling it, you're fine, it's fine. My buddies are there. In a situation like this, it's all hands on deck. I gotta get there. I don't want any of my buddies to get hurt. So finally, they just turned off the TV, redirected him to something else, and he was fine. But he was getting more and more upset because, again, it was happening on TV, so it's happening right then and there, right now. And in his reality, he was still on the police force. He needed to get there. Confusing objects. Oh, using the remote control, picking it up when the phone's ringing. Hello, I've seen this a lot. And I'm not understanding why that stupid phone keeps ringing. Why is nobody talking to me? Using the razor to comb their hair or brush their teeth. Yeah, safety starts to become an issue when you talk about confusing objects. And our family was telling me that, and this kind of goes with not only confusing objects, but also recognizing what's real and what's not. They're telling me that Mom would call them in the middle of the night and say, there's spaceships landing on the front yard, and they're going to take me away, and I'm terrified. Okay? And the daughters are like, Mom, there are no spaceships landing on your front yard. Just go back to sleep and don't bother me again. She would call them during the night several times. Finally, we were talking, I'm like, why don't you just go see what's happening when she calls you, rather than just try to talk her through it. So they did. Next time she called, they went to see what was going on. And what they found out is her house was on like a curve of the road. And when cars were coming, their lights would shine into her house, into her bedroom. And she thought that was spaceships, because that was her perception. They're spaceships. They're landing. They're going to take me away. Real easy fix, they got those darkening blinds or shades, whatever those are, and we're able to eliminate the light for her. But yeah, not perceiving things correctly. Depth perception becomes a real challenge. Black looks like a hole for a person with dementia. So Maybe you can walk on air, but they can't. So they're not gonna do it. Black looks like the whole white on white is a syndrome that we talk about with people with dementia, is distinguishing colors. They lose depth perception, so if things are the same color, they can't tell that there's really something there. So, at somebody's home, you wanna make them a nice meal, right? You wanna make sure that they're getting good nutrition, so you decide, oh, we're gonna have a grilled chicken breast tonight, and I'll make some cauliflower to go with that, and some nice white rice to go with it. Put it on their white china, and guess what? They don't eat it. Okay, and when somebody doesn't eat, what then do we think or say?
Aren't you feeling well?
Aren't you feeling well? Yeah, what's the problem? This person's refusing to eat, and it's because they can't see it. Or the other thing that happens is you're sitting across from them, and they're reaching over and grabbing your food. Okay? And that's because that's what they can see. Because a person with dementia, take your hands and make like binoculars. Remember when you were a kid, you always used to do this, and it's so much fun. Okay? A person in the later middle stages of dementia, that's pretty much what they see. Right? And even in the earlier stages, their field of vision is going to be about 18 by 18 inch box. So if it's not right in front of them, they're not seeing it. So when you got those binoculars on, you can't see that plate in front of you, right? You see the one that's across from you. Sequencing of tasks becomes difficult for a person with dementia. Has anybody worked with that person that might be walking and all of a sudden they get stuck? They walk right into the wall or into the door, and then what happens? They can't figure out that they need to either turn or need to back up because they're not able to sequence tasks any longer. They're not able to, their brain can't tell them, oh, I just ran into something, back up. That's why a lot of times we tell people to try to make an area in the home where they can walk. People with dementia do tend to walk a lot, and it leads to what we call wandering. But if you're making a safe area for them to just walk, the best thing is if you maybe go out walking with them, walk around the block, around and around and around, so that there's not any obstacles that they're running into. But it's not just walking. But think about how many steps it takes to brush your teeth. Right? If you tell a person with dementia to go brush your teeth, they're not going to be able to do all those steps in the right order. They're not going to, first of all, remember all the steps, and they're not going to be able to do them in the right order. And then they add in that confusing of objects, and there's the razor laying there. Oh, that must be what I brush my teeth with. So yeah, it can become dangerous for that person to try to even do their own daily cares. Yes.
So how do you help someone who becomes belligerent and forceful because they don't know how?
Yeah, good question. We're going to get to that in a minute. How do we help somebody? I think what your question is, help them to take care of themselves and do some of those daily cares. I'm going to get to that just a minute here. I'm running out of time.
That's fine.
Okay, we're going to get to that really quick because I really want to show you that. That is the hand under hand assistance. I gave you a handout on that. But keeping in mind at this point, behaviors becoming very risky. So, hand under hand. I'm going to come back to some of those. This is a great way to help somebody with their activities of daily living. Can I use you as a volunteer? Why don't you come on up here a second, just so everybody can see us. What you want to do is put out your hand like you're going to shake it. And instead of grasping their hand like you do when you shake, and I'll tell you, a person with dementia, you put out their hand to shake it, they're probably going to take it. If they don't take it, back off. But that's something you learn very early. So, but instead of grasping, I'm going to slide my fingers so that I've got my thumb and my forefinger that I can use, and then I can do things we can unbutton the buttons, and we can comb her hair, we can brush her teeth and put on some makeup and do a lot of things. And hopefully that feels a little bit like you're helping rather than me doing something to you. Thank you. What was your name? Terry, thank you.
You're doing that when they would resist, let's say, helping brushing your teeth, let's say they say, I can do it, you know, so.
And if they can, then yeah, then
Yeah.
at that point you can actually just kind of let go and let them take over if they are actually doing it.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing is sometimes people with arthritis, it's hard for them to hold your hand like that, but then if you just put their hand on your arm, the hand that you're doing things with, it still makes them feel a little bit connected, like they're helping. It's less threatening than me coming up to that person, especially when I come in from the front and start doing things to them. So hand under hand assistance, I gave you the handout on that. Practice that, try that with each other. The other important thing I want to, can I just have 2 more minutes?
Yeah, keep going.
Go back to is the view and the approach is very important. Remember I mentioned that area that they can see directly in front of them, right? So when you're approaching somebody with dementia, try not to approach from the back or even the side. You'll never come up behind a person and just start doing something with them. When you're approaching that person, what you want to be doing is just walking to them. And what was your name?
Oh, shoot.
Sherry?
Sheila.
Sheila, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to be working with Sheila today. And I walk up to her. Hi, Sheila. It's Ginny. How are you today?
I'm good.
Good. Glad to hear that.
I'm manipulating.
I'm not going to manipulate you. Again, she doesn't have dementia, so she's a little cautious. But did you notice some things that I did as I was approaching her?
I don't know. All I was closing my eyes on it.
Eye contact, yeah, trying to look right at her. I think what you were saying was kind of slowing down. Takes a person with dementia longer to process. Oh, somebody's coming towards me, not sure what they're going to do, but slowing down. What else did I do?
Introduce yourself.
I introduced myself, called her by name, I waved at her. Again, I stuck out my hand for the shape, and that's really going to give you permission to touch them. If they take your hand, and again, shaking hands, when do you learn that? You're very, very young, right? When you learn that, that's a sign of respect. When somebody sticks out your hand, you take it. If Sheila wouldn't have taken it, it's not touching day for Sheila, back off. Okay? Or could be not the best consequences if you don't back off in that situation.
Sometimes people are a little sensitive to the tone of voice too.
Yeah.
Like, if you're really high or, like, hi, you know, they jump out of their chair or whatever it is and they get, upset.
Yeah,
I noticed that.
yeah.
How you really medium tone or whatever it is very important.
Yeah, and even tone to a point.
Yeah.
You also want to try to make it seem like you're a friend.
Okay.
So that smile in your voice, somebody that they should know even if they don't recognize. She's smiling at me, she's you know what, that must be feeling really lousy that you are AOL. But it's okay. I'm here, it's okay. You know, even if you have to say, I talked to your leader, he knows I'm here, he said it's okay to be here. And then tell me about your buddies. Yes, Mary?
I also think of that when I see that slide as being in the moment as to what do they want to do when they want to do it.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
If you could maybe touch on that a little bit, like if they want to go for a drive at that moment, that's the time we need to do what they want to do.
Right.
Or if they want to take a shower at an odd time, we need to jump on that when they want to do it,
Yep.
not when it's our
Right.
schedule.
Not when it's convenient for us, but when they want to do it, so being in that moment. You know, if you get there and your shift starts at noon and your first thing you're supposed to do is make lunch for them, and they decide, I don't want to eat, you know, I want to go for a drive, or I want to go for a walk. Being in that moment, not forcing them to try to do something that they don't want to do, because again, it's going to turn into an ugly situation. It's going to make them frustrated and anxious, it's going to make you frustrated and anxious, and you're not going to get anywhere. So being in that moment, whatever that moment might be that they want to do.
Or you could just say too, being, go with the flow. Right about the situation.
Yeah.
You have to be a little bit, flexible.
Flexible,
Really
absolutely.
flexible.
You have to be flexible, you have to think outside of the box.
Exactly.
Yeah, and another thing that may help, especially, let's say, okay, it's time to give them meds, and they're like, no meds now, it's time to go for a walk. Well, sometimes that might be okay. Sometimes, those meds, it's not negotiable. They gotta have them, especially if you're dealing with somebody with Parkinson's. They have to have those meds at a certain time, and it's a very strict regimen, and it's very serious consequences if they're skipping or double dosing and things like that. So sometimes it also helps to make that task secondary. Knowing that they enjoy talking about gardening. So look, I just got this new gardening magazine. Help me pick out some flowers for my garden. And while you're doing that, you can hand them the meds, hand them the glass of water, and without even saying something, you would be surprised how normal reaction, just take those meds. Somebody just handed me. Because again, that's something that's ingrained in us from a very young age. So, what other questions? I do apologize, I ran out of time here. What other questions? What other situations are you dealing with that? Nothing?
Oh. Well, do you think there's a progression that people get more angry as they deal with, or do they get more passive? I think, if it's Alzheimer's, it's also physical deterioration. They can't move it, like, let's say somebody has dementia, and it seems like, they seem to be more short with their situation, with people, or with demanding, and is that progressive, or is that just kind of happenstance?
With Alzheimer's disease, anger, aggression, agitation is not a symptom of the disease in itself.
Right.
However, I will tell you that anxiety, agitation, aggression, even anger, is a lot of times produced because of something that we did or something that they aren't able to communicate to us, or something that has led up to that. Okay? And they're not going to be able to tell you what that something might be. But remember I said before, feelings, emotions, those amygdala, not damaged. Okay? So they're going to remember if somebody made them mad. They're not going to remember who it is. They're not going to remember what happened that made them mad. But they're going to remember that feeling of anger and hold on to that feeling of anger unless we do something to get that released. Okay? So somebody try doing that, and they're all of a sudden forcing themselves into your home. Okay, who does that? A bad person, right? So again, sometimes that anger and aggression is because of how we approach the situation or something we did, and we may not even be aware of it. And you might have to step back and think, oh, wow, yeah, that was stupid, I'm not gonna do that again. How can I handle that better?
That comes up very from redirection.
I'm sorry, what's
That
that?
comes up very from redirection. Nothing works.
When you're trying to redirect them,
You have a gentleman that just.
and nothing works?
Yeah,
Okay,
well, yeah,
knowing their life story is gonna help a lot.
Yeah.
If you know some things about them, you know some of their favorites, you know some of their stories.
yeah,
Are we talking about a certain person?
yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
You,
and you're all thinking
you
the
probably,
same one.
you probably know them too.
I probably know them.
Yeah,
Oh man, I haven't been here in several years.
yeah,
Oh,
I do work fair shift with a gentleman, and we can't do nothing, he just, I can find out on the floor, and you try everything, you don't know what else to do.
hey, you don't know what, do you know some of his favorites?
You can try, when it's baseball, you can try rejecting his baseball, and it don't work, you try rejecting anything else, it just, there's nothing you can do sometimes.
Does everybody else know who she's talking about? Or some of you had some success with this person?
yeah, right now, Angela, we don't have a lot of that household people here. He does tend to be a little bit more challenging because he has very limited interests. And very different type of dementia.
Okay.
So many of the things we've talked about, I think, apply, but even for those of us who've done this a lot more.
I don't know
Right.
what to do to
Right.
that point.
Yeah, and I will tell you,
In a safe
depending
place.
upon the type of dementia, that those behaviors are gonna be different. Because I said, with Alzheimer's disease, anger and aggression isn't usually a symptom. That's not necessarily the case with some of the other dementias. So if you're dealing with that, what I would suggest is, first of all, we have a helpline, you can call us anytime, get ideas. We also have a list of 292 things to do with a person with dementia. Everybody didn't have that, 292. Used to be 300, there were some duplicates, so it's 292. But guess what, people remember that. I'm looking for that, 292. Yeah, those are some very simple things you might want to try with him. Again, depending upon the dementia, if it is just a symptom of the disease that he's dealing with, you need to really consult with his physician on some other ideas. I don't push medications, especially psychotropics, because those are very dangerous for somebody with dementia, but I also understand that in some situations, they need to be used, but they also need to be very closely monitored by a physician. And I will tell you, primary physician may not necessarily be the best one in that situation. A lot of times if you can get psychiatrists involved, especially geriatric psychiatrists, would be the ultimate, but we deal with what we have. But if you can get a psychiatrist involved in that situation, that might be helpful too.
One other thing, maybe would just address, I hear from clients, families, caregivers, they'll say, so-and-so would have never said that before, and now they say it now, and it's almost like the filter is off. They have behaviors they never had before, and I think that can be hard for families and people working with them to understand, but why would they say that? They would have never said that before.
Yeah, and you know that on the head, their filter is
Off.
it's off, it's gone, it's
Right.
lost, it's destroyed. That's that front part of the brain which filters out what is socially accepted, all those things your mom taught you, that's all stored right there. And when that part of the brain's destroyed, and in Alzheimer's disease, that part of the brain's destroyed pretty early on. They say things, they do things. So when you're I gave you resources here to use. If nothing else, hand them our helpline number and say, you know what? Call this number. They can explain it a little better than I can. But yeah, it does happen, unfortunately.
And if you are dealing with a family that maybe we are not as involved with, if we're not doing care management with that family, feel free to still let the care manager here know, either myself, Julie, Wendy, Michelle, let us know, so we can reach out to that family and say, hey, there are resources available. So please know that you can do that, especially again, there's some households that we're not quite as involved in, if we're not doing care management. Thank you so much, Ginny. I know, you know, as Ginny said, she didn't get through the whole slide because I've done presentations too, and she'll tell you, there's so much, you know, it's one of those topics that, every bit that you keep adding on to your toolkit that you have to bring to our clients is gonna help you, it's gonna help our clients, but you're never gonna learn it all. I've listened to, over the years, you know, a lot of presentations. I've done lots of presentations, I've gone to lots of seminars, and I learned new things today. So don't feel bad that you didn't, you know, that you're not gonna walk away as an expert. That wasn't the idea. And you will continue to need to learn more and more, but at least we have a better understanding than you did yesterday, and that growth and development will continue. If you have any other follow-up questions, please feel free to let us know. Like Ginny said, she's got a lot of great handouts, so thank you so much, Ginny, and thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for all you do. Thanks for your attention. And a couple of training notes, and feel free to take as many as you want. I brought enough for all 65, but the communication and behavior ones, and these are great pieces to give to families too.
If I could just make one caution on that, be careful handling information. We'd rather have that come from care managers' information, only because sometimes we know how families will deal with getting information. Some kind of get offended if we don't do it the right way, so that kind of information, just give us an email and say, hey, I was thinking